Hello again. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Barbara Iverson. I'm really pleased to be moderating the digital dialogue today. This is our first one for 2024, so we're really excited. First, though, for those who may be blind or have a visual impairment, all of us who are speakers will start with a short self-description. So my name is Barbara. I am a white woman with blonde hair and black glasses and a red plaid shirt. All right. So in this first digital dialogue of 2024, we are putting the spotlight on electronic waste. Do we all know what happens to our discarded electronic devices and equipment, such as computers, smartphones, screens, printers, loudspeakers, and other outdated electronic gadgets? Not all of us are aware of the improper disposal and management of e-waste and the risks it poses with regard to environmental pollution and health. And while there's plentiful scientific knowledge from research about the hazard, the volume of e-waste keeps increasing steadily. The promotion of innovative ideas, for example, the sustainable use of resources and recycling of raw materials by politicians and civil society, has not yet had the desired impact. Quite to the contrary. Technological advances, short product life cycles, new business models, and a growing global demand are responsible for the ever-increasing production of plastics and chips, often containing toxic substances, for instance, lead, mercury, and cadmium, to name a few. Needless to say, the CO2 footprint of these devices, both in production and in use, is contributing to the ongoing climate crisis. And because many countries lack effective regulations and infrastructure for the proper handling and recycling of e-waste, others, mostly in the global south, have become the e-waste dumping ground of the rich economies of the global north. So, to help us discuss these issues and more, we are delighted to welcome to the panel today Teresa Dillon, Eduardo Bodo, and Professor Mahita Ikani. So, we are going to take a few moments for them to introduce themselves to you and share some key points of the work that they're doing in the realm of e-waste. They'll have about 5 minutes to do it, and then after they've done their introduction, we will have discussion amongst the panelists, and then at the end, we will be taking questions that you've put into the chat or those submitted in the registration process. So remember, if you have questions, please put them into the chat. We won't get to all of them, but we will definitely try. All right, so Teresa, you are first. Would you please turn on your camera and join me here? Hi, Teresa. So she is joining us from Bristol in the UK. Would you introduce yourself, share your key points, and don't forget to start with a brief self-description.
Thanks, Barbara, and thanks to the hosts for this conversation and for all who are joining from different parts of the world today. I'm Teresa Dillon. I'm Professor of City Futures at the School of Art and Design at the University of the West of England in Bristol. I'm an artist and a researcher, and I am the lead on a project called RepairAx, which I will describe in a few more minutes. And Ryan, I hope, will also add the slide at this point to the presentations. For those of you to support the description, I have brown hair, I have pinky white Irish skin, which is my birth country. I'm wearing black jumper and polo neck today, and on the right of me is a wonderful little plant. So RepairAx is a program that I describe as artist-led, pluralistic research program that sits in the heart of the School of Art and Design in the University, as I mentioned, of the West of England in Bristol. I've been leading on this project since 2018, and we work in locally and also in Brazil, India, Ireland, collaborators across those countries and across the UK as well. Core to the work is looking at how artistic practices such as installation, documentary, moving image, can bring us into a conversation about this broad topic of repairability. As you will see here from the tagline, Repair Acts looks to fostering restorative cultures by connecting past stories with what we do today to how we envisage the future. So in thinking about those past stories, some of the work that we do is what we would also describe traditional desk-based research. So for example, we map local histories of repair economies going back to 1938 and taking these 20 years time slices up to the present and looking at how local repair economies have changed in that time. And what does that do? That enables us to speak to questions about the diversity of local repair economies, what people actually have been able to repair, our relationship to material goods, with one of the points being that for us, if you think about accessibility and diversity in your local area, that can actually maybe change what you might decide to get repaired and how close you might be to a professional repairer as well. Alongside this type of work, we also have a number of programs, for example, called the People's Archive of Everyday Repair, where we have gathered stories again from all of the countries that we are working in about what people are repairing on a day-to-day basis. And this looks to the aesthetics of repair. It looks to the motivations of what people are repairing. It looks to barriers of what might be blocking people to kind of like be able to repair goods. It looks at costs, and all of this then also supports some of the local governance and policy work that we also do, which is speaking up then to those in power, particularly around questions of planned obsoletism and how we might change ways in which we are manufacturing goods, which is at the heart, of course, of this matter in a sense. And in doing all of that work, we work then with a number of, let's call it stakeholders, what might be traditionally called, or local actors, activists, colleagues such as Restart in London, and a number of the repair cafes then across Bristol, and others who are working within this particular kind of space. I'm flagging here the declaration, which is another methodology that we use for supporting how we can think about fostering local repair economies in a sense. And what these local repair declarations do is they crowdsource in a sense through the workshops and the public activities that we do, ideas for how we might actually kind of provoke and promote more repairable, restorative futures. And this one here is an example from Westmeath, which is the region that we have worked extensively in, that sits in the heart of Ireland. It's one of the counties that are in the Republic of Ireland. And as you can see here, you know, things that people are interested in promoting are modular design, alternatives to plastic, better quality products, you know, better materials information, perhaps reducing tax obligations on people who are repairers, looking to supporting VAT breaks, for example, manufacturer transparency. These are the demands that over 16 months we gathered through over 40 different workshops and public events. And so what the people in this region were also calling for then was to kind of like ask the council how we can support local repair directories, local repair community hubs, financially support apprenticeships, look at towards better leadership in this area as well, in terms of local governance and national governance as well. Looking at how we can actually foster this through a number of incentives. And I can pick up this at the later point as well, in terms of how this connects then to what we broadly call the right to repair movement, which is a global movement of many, many actors across different communities including, for example, the Repair Cafe movement, Restart parties, Fix Factories, the Fix Fest Festival, and those who are working on a European level to actually change law and legislation. So I can pick up more about this, Barbara, in the shared sessions and in the Q&A, but hopefully that gives you a flavour of the Repair Acts program and also the methodologies and the artist practices that sit at the heart of it and how they intersect then with design, policy, governance, and other issues around manufacturing and where we are at this current state of affairs.
Great. Good. Thank you so much, Teresa, for the introduction, and we will come back to this, so you will have more time to share what you're doing. So you can turn your camera off right now, and I will ask Eduardo to join me on screen. Eduardo is currently in Brussels, so there he is. You have around 6 minutes or so to share with us the work that you're doing. So unmute yourself. Don't forget to start with a short self-description and tell us about what you're doing.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Barbara, and thanks a lot really to everyone for the invitation and for attending this meeting. I will start by introducing myself. I am a white guy, young, no beard, and I'm wearing a sweater. Hope this helps. I also represent Reuse, which is a network of social enterprises active in the circular economy, and we represent almost 1,000 individual social enterprises in 31 countries. And our members work with several groups, product groups, including electronics. But what makes our members special is that by working in the repair and reuse of products, they also employ people who have vulnerabilities, who are distant from the labor market for whatever reason. They can be refugees, they can be people with mental or physical disabilities. So we like to think that we give a second chance to both objects and people. And we do work on electronics, which I guess is why I'm here. And before we start talking about electronics from a circular economy perspective, it's important to understand what makes this product category so special. And the production of electronics has an enormous environmental impact because it requires the mineral extractions of many different elements. For instance, a smartphone battery contains cobalt from Congo, 50% of it. And this is usually mined in conditions which are straight from the Middle Ages, really terrible from an environmental and social point of view, but also lithium from South America, which is causing a water crisis that is affecting many indigenous communities across the Andes, for instance. And the other thing that's important is once electronics break, they become waste, electric waste. And e-waste is special because it's both valuable, it contains a lot of precious metals, including gold, but also it's toxic because it's full of dangerous chemicals. So usually precious resources are kept in Europe, and all the toxic waste full of low value stuff like plastics of dangerous chemicals are exported. What happens here? That the global south bears the consequences of both the production and the disposal of our electronics, but they don't use most of these electronics, which I think it's shameful. And as a European, I won't claim to speak for the global south, for people who are on the receiving end, but I will speak from what we have to do here in the north. And what we need to do is to rethink our relationship with our consumer products, including electronics, to rethink our relationship with our economic system in the end. I come from a circular economy perspective, and the root of circular economy is the 3 R's. So reduce, reuse, recycle. The reduce aspect, well, it's very simple. It's just about buying less stuff. For instance, I like to say that the most sustainable phone is the phone you already have. And right now we are also seeing a peak of energy efficiency and processing power. So if you buy a new phone every few years, you don't actually gain much. Reuse aspect is a bit more complex, and indeed it's about right to repair, but it's also about exploring alternative business models such as sharing and renting, but all with the idea of prolonging the life cycle of products for as much as possible. Then, and only then, we have recycling. And we need the strict controls on recycling to prevent the export of toxic waste to the global south. But we should also remember that this is the end of the line. We should try first to reduce consumption, then to use our products for as much as possible, and only then to send these products for recycling and ensuring that they're recycled under the best standards available. So in one way, we need to be consumers against consumerism, and we need to realize that with every purchase we make, we cast a vote. So we can vote in favor of new cheap products which are made with no regards to environmental or social consideration, or we can vote in favor of more sustainable choices, depending on what we want to buy. But I'm fully aware that looking at factors beyond price is a luxury. Firstly, you need to be able to afford higher prices, and even then it takes time to avoid all the greenwashing and the social washing. One tip is, when in doubt, to buy second-hand. This is because a second-hand product is already there. Most of the impact is in production, and since the product is already there, it's already been produced, you may as well use it. But also to engage with the sharing economy, because now we're seeing big businesses getting really into that, but there are likely established local initiatives near you. So before throwing something into a bin, think if you can repair an object, if you can repurposing it, if you can give it to someone, or if you can donate it to a social enterprise where it will support work for people who need them the most, but it will also support many charitable initiatives in your local community. Because if you throw something into a bin, this may or may not get recycled properly, but for sure it will be destroyed and to recover the material. So actually you cannot use the product anymore. One final thing is that we are not consumers, we are citizens, and in this meeting we are also civil society representatives. And it's fundamental to put pressure on lawmakers at all of the levels of government, including international, to curb our unsustainable resource consumption in Europe, but also to ensure resource justice for people outside of Europe, as these two objectives go hand in hand. It's very important that we act now, because we really need to act now, because it's already late, and we need to choose if we want a more sustainable model of development, or if we just want to drown in useless electronic crap that we keep buying. And the choice needs to happen now. Thanks a lot, and I'd be really, really happy to take your question afterwards.
Thank you, Eduardo. Appreciate that. You can turn off your camera. For those of you who have just joined us, and also those who've been listening, if you think of a question as you're hearing our panelists talk, please put it into the chat, and we will come to it in a few moments. So our final panelist is Mahita. She's joining us from Cape Town, South Africa. And Mahita, lovely to see you. Would you please introduce yourself, tell us about the work that you're doing, and start with a self-description?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Greetings. Thank you so much for the chance to be here. My name is Mahita Irani. I'm a professor of media and communications at Stellenbosch University in South Africa. And I'm a critical analyst of media and culture and popular culture. I am in my mid-40s. I've got dark, short hair, black hair that's kind of going a bit gray, and olive skin, and I'm wearing a kind of blue t-shirt because it's very hot in Cape Town at the moment. And today what I'd like to talk to you guys about in the few minutes that I have is about how artists who work with e-waste, or specifically one artist who works with e-waste. And I know time is short, but I just wanted to preface a brief discussion of one particular artwork by just telling you a little bit how I came to the study of the aesthetics of waste. And that was really through my academic career in thinking about consumer culture and wanting to understand why it is that discourses and the values of consumption and consumer culture are so effective and so good at bringing us all on board mentally and emotionally with these very specific arguments about the world and how it should be organized. So I've spent many years critically analyzing consumerist messaging, promotional communication, and looking at the ways in which media narratives and aesthetics kind of get us all on board with this highly consumerist set of values that pretty much defines most societies around the world, no matter how unequal, and sometimes even more so in the highly unequal societies. And then the other kind of entry point to thinking about art made with e-waste for me is the growing domain of scholarship in the realm of ecomedia. So, and it's quite delayed actually in media and communication studies for this revelation to kind of have been dawning upon us that all media are geological. It's been a niche in media studies for a few years and of kind of looking for the environmental links, but it's high time that these perspectives are mainstreamed, right? Every single item that we consume through the media landscape that surrounds us is produced with technology that comes from raw materials extracted from the earth, as Eduardo was just describing. So that means that the very devices that we use to connect, right, are geological, are ecological. So this is beyond a question of ideology and representation. This is actually about the materiality of the mediated world, right? It has a huge ecological footprint, both in terms of extraction and in terms of the waste that is left behind after consumption. So just with those two kind of prefaces, I wanted to, if I have time, very briefly show you an image from this work by a South African artist called Francois Knutzer, who is a really interesting artist who works with waste. I will pop a link to his website into the chat once I'm finished talking. And Francois Knutzer is a multimedia artist who works with waste. And what he does is he goes and collects waste, found materials, often from recycling centers or elsewhere. And then with those collections of materials, fashions these marvelous and sometimes fantastical creatures. So these kind of wearable sculptures that he then puts his own body into and does performances which are filmed, and then those are edited into really complex short films with lots of different media clips and materials all kind of edited in. There's a lot going on in these works and it's hard to sum them up, but the image that you're seeing is of one of these fantastical creatures that was produced. As you may be able to see if you are sighted, this particular sculpture is produced with e-waste. It's produced with the circuit boards and the cabling, right, that has obviously been pulled out of derelict and no longer used electronic items. So in this particular work, which is called Core Dump, there are 4 short films, and each film was made in a different city using waste materials that were collected in that city. So there is a short film that is set in Kinshasa, which speaks to some of the politics of extractivism that Eduardo also mentioned, and that speaks to colonial histories and to the very problematic labor issues that are linked to the mining of the materials that animate electronic items. Second short film is set in Shenzhen in China, which is of course the location of the manufacture of almost every e-item that we use. And that's where this image comes from, is from that second short film in the quadrology of short films. And in that short film, there is an exploration of questions of export industrialization and the social and human cost of wealth creation through industrial manufacture and what some might call over-manufacture. And then there is a third film which is set in New York City in America, which is very much about the consumption, right? The hyper overconsumption of tech items and the individualization of tech consumption and shopping and the replacement of these objects over and over. And then the last film in Core Dump is set in Dakar, which is where most e-waste is shipped across the Atlantic and ends up being dumped in the e-waste dumps of West Africa. So what a task to try and summarize such a complex and really visually and ethically fascinating work. But I hope it gives you a little bit of a sense of how one artist has explored the politics and the aesthetics of e-waste. And I hope that you'll all be inspired to go and engage with that artist's work a little more. Last thing to say is I wrote about this piece in a chapter that is available in the Routledge Handbook of Ecomedia. So that is also available if anyone wants to engage a little further. I know my time is up, so thank you for listening.
Mahita, thank you so much. Yes, please put the name of the artist. I've written it down here for myself because I'm really interested to explore more. You had mentioned it in a pre-call and I could not imagine what it would look like, but it's as she described, like it's like a being, a creature standing with wires coming out as fingers and as legs, and it's enormous and super complex, and really quite a fascinating way to reuse electronic waste in a whole new way, give it new life and give it new meaning. So thank you so much, Mahita, for sharing that with us. For those of you who are raising your hands, if you have questions for any of our panelists, please put them into the chat. We won't be unmuting anybody else. So if you've got something that you'd like to ask, please use the chat for that. But I'm going to ask all three of our panelists to turn their cameras back on and join me on the virtual stage, so to speak. It's wonderful. We've heard from all three of you now. And I'm hearing kind of a similar take from both Teresa and Mahita with the influence of art. And I wonder if the two of you might have things that you wanted to discuss with each other, or things that each of you thought of as you saw some of this. So I want to give you the space to talk about some of the connections that you saw between the art aspect of this e-waste problem. So Mahita, I see you nodding your head. So Teresa too. Yeah, feel free to unmute yourselves and let's hear from you.
Mahita, I'm happy to, I guess, kick off there. I totally agree also with your point around the question of the fringeness in some ways about the materiality of our digital worlds that has in some ways been, as you mentioned, a very strong element of media scholarship and media, what people would also call media archaeology, for some decades, but hasn't really hit that mainstream sort of resonance in a way. And I think for me, the role of artistic practice, the role of the Work and Repair Acts is actually that translational work around what I have recently written on actually is grounding technologies, grounding technology into the earth, in a sense, into the mundaneness and the labor that Eduardo was, completely highlighting. The work, I guess, to kind of that Mahita also flagged, which is a wonderful piece, and thank you for describing it in the richness that you did in this short space of time, I think is a really good example of how artistic practice can also link sort of local issues with global flows and the geopolitical kind of struggles then that are borne out in relation to these extractive principles, in a sense, in terms of consumption and production, and flag then this sort of the circuits of circulation, so to speak, that are at play here in a way. And just to highlight that again, linking back to kind of what Eduardo was also saying, in the north, e-waste per capita per person ranges from like 18 kilos per person per year up to about 23, 24, even sometimes higher in some places, right? That's like sugar bags, your traditional sort of sugar bag hanging off you, So when Mahita also shared that, grotesque monster, I actually have also sort of like similarly done performative work that also sort of uses a similar strategy, because it just, it hangs as a weight very visually then in front of you. If we were to then think through, for example, the amount of e-waste that may be produced per capita per person. And there's, it's interesting to even like look at the stats on this. It can be as low as 2 to 3 kilos per person in different countries, and for example, across Africa. So that's staggering, really. Yet who are the people that are doing that cleanup job, in a sense? And I think this is kind of the question that, for me, again, looping back in here to Eduardo's point around responsible consumption and production, just ethical responsibilities that we have at this particular point in time in relation to the labor conditions, and who are the green workers now and in the future. And I think that I think it's great that we have this sort of also catchphrase of give people a second chance and give the objects a second chance. But I would also say, from a sort of critical perspective as well, what are the conditions that is happening in? Who are the people? Are there people that are in already difficult situations? What is the living wage that they are receiving? What is their chances for progression in their own life and well-being in their own life? All of those aspects really are kind of quite critical to kind of point out to, and then also expanding this like logics of policy beyond the 3 R's. We have power to refuse things, and more expansive set of these 3 R's is refusal. It's actually regifting. There's all the other elements that kind of come into it. And I think we should also sort of start to think through what, as civil actors, we have in our hands to kind of push back, or to demand change on this level, because we are in a very strong environmental situation here in a crisis. So that's my 2p on it, but I hope, Mahita, you can pick up on aspects of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the work that you're doing through Repair Acts is so very inspiring. But when I was listening to you describe it, I kept asking myself, how would this play out in the kinds of contexts that we live in African cities, which, for those of you in the audience who are from African cities, you don't need me to explain to you. And for those of you who have never visited, they are characterized by huge inequality and a huge difference in resources. And there will be the beautiful shining malls and the 5-star hotels and the homes with swimming pools. And this is true for every African city I've visited, not just South African cities. And then of course there will be, those who are scraping to get by on a subsistence level and living side by side. So in economies that are characterized by those levels of inequality, coupled with and sometimes produced by quite significant problems or I don't know if I call them problems, but like challenges in terms of governance and delivery of services, especially public services, then there's this like individualization of everything onto the individual person, whether they're rich or poor, right, in African contexts. And then e-waste kind of comes into those conversations in quite interesting ways, because, okay, how are things fixed? There are many repair shops. Every African city I've ever been to has a cell phone repair shop on the corner. It's actually very easy to get things fixed if you're in Kampala or Johannesburg or Lagos, right? So it's a little bit different, perhaps, to how the politics of repair plays out in the West. So, I mean, not to repeat a slightly kind of worn cliche, but there is quite a bit that the global North can learn from the global South in terms of sustainable practices. But I also don't want to romanticize those, because there is also huge aspiration and strong desire for, and to be fair, like a valid desire for new, shiny, nice things that are not repaired or upcycled or cast off from others and fixed, right? So there's a tension, and it really is the tension that characterizes consumer culture and late capitalism, between the absolutely valid wish to have a better life and to aspire for nice things, and these structural conditions that make the distribution of those nice things completely unjust. So it's like the whole continent of Africa is so good at repairing things, yet also there is this export of waste being dumped on our cities, putting precarious workers at great risk of personal harm from the toxic substances. So there is both, the extraction, there is the processing of the after effects, and all of this is happening within a context of aspiration. So we have some very tricky cultural, economic, and political challenges facing us when thinking about what to do with e-waste in our own kind of home settings.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just kind of spoke off the top of my head there. But I would love to hear more from Eduardo about what his organization does to kind of help to promote like sustainable and sensible policies in different settings around the world.
Sure. Can I jump in? Yeah. What do we do? What does our organization do to promote this around the world? Well, probably not enough. We are an EU-based network. We are based in Brussels. We are expanding beyond Europe. We are in touch with activists both from also from the global north, from the US, for instance, because I'm reading some questions in the chat. I may anticipate them, but there is this thing called the Basel Convention on Transboundary Movement of Waste, and I'm really sorry for the interpreter because it's such a complex word. But this Basel Convention is the main UN text on electronic waste, and it's also where the whole movement to curb e-waste, unsustainable e-waste started, when they started putting microchips into the computers, into the electronic appliances to try and track them. We also expanded our collaboration with, people from the civil society, both in Europe and outside Europe. We are based in Belgium. Of course, there are links with Congo, where a lot of the cobalt is from. And so we try to cooperate more with organizations there. And if I may add something, sorry to bring this back to Europe, but we are going to have elections very soon here in the EU. And if you look at all forecasts, the right-wing parties are supposed to make a lot of gains. So we are going to find ourselves in an environment which is very, very different. With we are already seeing a pushback on social and environmental legislation, and there is a case of packaging here, which is also an issue. So we are already seeing this happen, and we actually came together with NGOs and civil society organizations to publish a paper calling for a European framework on resource justice, both inside and outside Europe. We expect this to be a really uphill battle because, of course, we are against the multi-billion-dollar industries, which is always the case. But right now, we'll also be in a parliament that will be even more friendlier to this. And so as civil society, this for us, it's an important priority because unfortunately, even though the conditions are not the right, we can't wait because we know of the climate crisis. 45% of emissions are from an unsustainable model of production. The other 55% is the energy system, but the catch is that the same materials used to make our electronics are also used to make a lot of our renewable energy, especially, for instance, neodymium magnets for PV, for not photovoltaics, for wind turbines. So indeed, that's why we need to choose if we want more cheap electronics or if we want to decarbonize our energy system. That's why we need to choose if we want resource justice or if we want to continue to business as usual, maybe try doing things a bit more sustainable, use a bit more recycled plastics or whatever, which won't help. And that's why we need the support of all civil society, both from Europe and outside Europe, because the industry it's transnational. They already have support of other players. So I think it's already very helpful to have a discussion like this, but I do think it's always better if this can follow up and lead to concrete action.
Can I come in there and just sort of second that? Because I really think that these alliances, these trans-country alliances and solidarities are like critical at this particular kind of point. And you know, also in my role, both as an academic, and Mahita, and maybe can also pick up on this is sort of like what I want to speak to is like responsible scholarship, you know, scholarship that, and art tech activism. You know, there's many people that are like, let's say, a similar head to myself that are working in this space and working then with partners and organizations like Eduardo's is actually like, you know, vital, I think, in a sense. We can be collectively smarter in a sense about this and stronger together when we also speak to these kind of alliances and allegiances. And I think that this is kind of really important, you know, to kind of continue, not just to have the dialogues are important, and to have the people, you know, brokering these relationships, because, you know, we have not met before. This is also, you know, really, you know, vital to this type of kind of digital conversation that you're sort of hosting as well. And I think also then, you know, the work that I sort of, I guess, I speak a lot about what we call place-based, you know, action in a sense. So connecting really these like local matrices to these bigger global flows then that are happening are really sort of where you sort of need to be nudging the thing all of the time, because, you know, people in Eduardo's position and those that are working in the right to repair movement, or organizations such as Restart, you know, they're pushing at the law and legislation kind of all of the time. And then, you know, we come in then at a certain other angle, and then, you know, artistic practices are coming in articulation and in amplifying and in interpreting and interlocutors, you know, essentially. So I think this is one thing I kind of just wanted to say there to reinforce what has been said in terms of like alliances, but also what Mahita was speaking to about this very, you know, question in a sense of aspirations. And we live in a society where we're constantly being marketed to actually like have these particular kind of lifestyles, which, you know, you cannot turn around and say to somebody, no, why don't you have that sort of secondhand good, when perhaps, you know, for them, it's important to have the new, and in a sense. So there's this kind of like, you know, in a way, repair is, I would say, a hopeful future, and it can help in some ways provide a sort of a sensibility towards how we might deal with some of these issues around climate. But in the end of the day, we actually, as a whole, need to be consuming less, right? And that can be a very hard ask when you're, you know, trying to kind of, you know, as Mahita again sort of said, aspire to certain particular ways of kind of living. What I think we should do in relation to that then is actually just celebrate more people who are working in the streets, repairing stuff. You know, there's a massive difference if you walk down any city in the global south to the global north in terms of the number of people that are working in repair. And you know, that's what I would encourage. That's what we have been encouraging with our colleagues in Brazil and in India. Highlight, celebrate, tell the stories of these everyday repair incidents, tell the stories of why what those people are doing in their repair. You know, think about, you know, their wages, think about the levels of toxicity that they might actually be having to actually engage and sit and be with every day, and actually look at how we can actually support different ways of thinking about that, which are to do with health conditions, which are to do about livability. It's kind of almost, you know, flipping what we privilege in society as key workers, you know. And I think that this is quite important, particularly as we have kind of growing middle classes that are, you know, aspiring in particular loops of consumption. And of course, I'm saying this very mindful of privilege in a sense that I'm holding when I'm saying that kind of conversation. But from the European perspective, like we're seeing such a shortage of people having those handy skills to be able to actually do that type of work. We're seeing from colleagues who are working in primary schools that people are losing fine motor skills, you know, to actually like sew, to knit and so forth. And these are actually like broader concerns as well in terms of, you know, material relationships, which again was flagged in the opening as well, but with the other speakers. So
yeah, Therese, we're gonna bring that to you've made some amazing points. I find myself listening to you, wishing you had a podcast, because I think it's incredibly informative, and I think that there's incredible value. I do want to get to a couple questions, and so we are running out of time, and always there's so many more things that we could talk about. So, but I have seen in several places questions from the registrations, but also here in the chat about what's possible for countries in the global south to do to sort of put an end to this dumping and create barriers. I mean, Mihita, you're nodding your head. Like, what's possible for countries in the global south to do if the global north is going to continue to do it? Is there a way to stop it from the other side?
I think there is certainly opportunity for African governments to come together and to collaboratively set some continent-wide policies and principles and regulations that can put the collective foot down to resist. China's done it, right? Has refused to take in ships of waste that used to routinely be shipped. And so I think African governments can do that too, but it would of course require political will and collaboration. But, you know, there is a stereotype about African governance, which is partly based on fact, but also partly simply based on prejudice. There are many governments on the continent that are working hard to try and fix things. And there are many good people in government as there are also bad people in government, right? And I think, you know, South Africa's recent foray onto the international stage to take the question of genocide to the International Court of Justice just kind of shows that where there is a political will, very strong ethical arguments can be made that can capture the international attention. So, of course, this is an extreme example, but like, were the actual human rights issues to be properly highlighted that are linked to recycling labor, to extractive labor, to, you know, the various ways in which the extractive economy is not only destroying planetary sustainability, but people's livelihoods and the quality of life. Like, I'm talking broadly about the climate crisis here, right? Of which e-waste and its recycling and its problematics is simply one part. Like, there is the opportunity and the possibility for African governments to act on this question internationally if they choose to. So then it falls on us as the citizens to try to make them act. It worked in South Africa. There was a huge civil society from multiple sectors in the country that pushed the government partly towards the action that it did take. So it is possible. So even though, you know, we are working in difficult political circumstances and very difficult economic circumstances, there is always the possibility of political action. And I hope that as citizens, we can push our governments to do more work like that and to advocate for the rights of Africans on the global stage in relation to e-waste and climate justice.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've all sort of talked about kind of those coalitions, those alliances that are necessary, that it's not just a one-pronged effort, that it's really multi-pronged. Because our time is running out, and so many of our audience members, as you can see in the chat, or you can look at it later, but many of them work in civil society organizations. And I want to give each of you just about a minute to talk about calls to action and what you think that people on either an individual level or certainly from a civil society organization perspective, what can be done? What can they start taking steps to do now? Eduardo, I'm going to come to you first, and then I'm going to go to Teresa, and then I'm going to go to Mihita. So Eduardo, what would you say is a call to action for civil societies organizations?
Yeah, to start coordinating between the global south and the global north, between activists, because the challenges we face are very different, but the issues at the end is the same. It's the economic system that is unsustainable. And even many of us here in the global north also do not benefit from this system. So it's important to being wary of different, of course, conditions of privilege, different issues that are challenged, but to start working more together on a common issue. And I know it's vague, but then again, I only have 1 minute, and this probably requires longer conversations. But yeah, and I think that resource justice is it's something where we could start. And if we have this platform of the International Civil Society Center, that could also be helpful.
Good. Thank you very much. All right, Teresa, 1 minute. What would you say? What's the call to action?
For me, the call to action is, get involved in your local area, speak to your Senate, speak to your council, lobby for mobile repair units, get involved in the right to repair movement, sign up with Restart, for example, and the repair declaration. The key things in Europe are that we want to expand the actual right to repair law to more products. At the moment, it's only kind of covering 4. There's, maybe a couple more that are 4 to 7 that at the moment are in different countries. Look towards how you can actually get repair vouchers, lobby for this type of kind of activity at a local level. And I think, on a more global level, I think one of the things that we can start to think about is, if I'm paying almost $1,000 from my computer or £1,000 for my phone, where is that money going? It's going into the hands and the profit of a company. How can I start to think about how some of that is going to the person who's going to collect it and clean it up and take the minerals out of the ground as well? This is justice. This is justice for other people who are actually providing me with the tech that allows me to connect on an everyday level and to do the work that I want to do and to live the life that I want to do. And let's make that fair for other people. So I think that's my demand as well. And that's sort of what we're trying to kind of like think through as well, and how we can actually, again, through alliances, support that type of thinking.
Great, thank you. And Mahita, we'll come to you for the last word.
So I'd say 2 calls to action. To consumers in the global north, I would say become better consumers and start to, be activist consumers. And in that respect, I'd recommend my colleague Eleftheria Lekakis's book, Consumer Activism. And to colleagues who are in civil society in Africa and the global south, I would say support artists who work with waste. Because artists who work with waste are thinking so creatively and so politically about the materiality of waste. And there's a lot to be learned from how they think and what they do. And if they're supported and given the space and the financial support and the community and the social support to keep doing what they do, there are opportunities there to shift feeling, shift opinion, and really shift ideas and attitudes about what waste is and how it can be a valuable resource in circular economies in the global south. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. We're going to have to end it there. And I want to let you all first know that the dialogues are all available for on-demand viewing on the digital dialogue section of the center's website. I think the link is going to be dropped into the chat. But I want to say thank you to our 3 panelists, Teresa, Mahita, and Eduardo. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. This is a topic that, honestly, I can say for myself is not hugely on my radar screen, but now it wasn't, but now it is. And it's definitely causing me to think. And I hope that's true for a lot of people. I want to say thank you to our 2 tireless interpreters for sign language. We really appreciate you in helping to make this a more accessible digital dialogue, and also to our transcript writer who's been typing endlessly throughout all of this. So thank you to all 3 of you. Thank you to you who showed up and asked questions. I know we didn't get to all of them. I hope that we did touch on many of those questions throughout the discussion. And you can see there's a quick poll on your screen. We'd love it if you filled that out very briefly. It only takes a moment, and give us a little bit of feedback. But until next time, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to the next digital dialogue. Take care, everybody.